Welcome back to React Native Radio Podcast. Brought to you by ChatGPT Pro. It won't stop thinking until you pay your $200. Episode 316, Debugging the Debugger.
I'm Jamon. This is React Native Radio. And I have two amazing guys here. Start with you, Cedric van Putten. Fun fact, I call Cedric my Dutch son, of course, and because my son's name is also Cedric. And in fact, I don't know if I've told you this, Cedric, but I actually tried to get the domain name cedric.dev, and I was like really bummed that I couldn't get it for my son, who's also a developer just starting his journey. But then I found out that my Dutch son got it, so that made it all okay. So Cedric.dev, that's your thing.
Sorry, not sorry.
I know you're not sorry. You shouldn't be. Tell me about yourself, what you do at Expo, that sort of thing.
So my name is Cedric. I work on Expo for a couple of years now. I think it's over 4 now. I have been working on like plenty of things, from customer success all the way to maintaining Snack, doing CLI work, bug fixing SDK, like doing research tasks, all the way to like wherever help is needed, I will jump in. And it has been a wild but fun ride so far.
Yeah, it's been great to get to know you over the years of you working at Expo. I don't know, you do some really cool stuff over there, and it's always fun to chat. And thanks. Alex, not to be left out. So my middle name is Alexander. So I guess you can be my British son. So tell me about yourself and what you do at Meta.
Hey, yeah, I'm Alex. I am a software engineer at Meta on the React team, and I work on developer experience. That's the JavaScript tooling, Metro, debugging, and everything in between. I've been there for 2.5 years now. Yeah, this is what I do now. I love it. Used to be a React Native engineer, and like being on the team, being part of it is really my dream job. And so anything we can do to make React and React Native better, I love working on.
Yeah, that's awesome. This has got to be incredibly exciting for you because this is like a big project that's shipping now, and we'll get into all that in just a bit here. But I guess I do need to read our sponsor thing, Infinite Red. My company, of course, we're a premier React Native consultancy located fully remote in the US. We have a team of 30 senior plus React Native developers, support staff. Have been doing this for nearly a decade. If you're looking for React Native expertise, hit us up, infinite.red/radio. That's a new URL. Don't forget to mention that you heard about us through the React Native Radio podcast. All right, enough of that. Pay the bills. Let's move on. The topic, debugging the debugger with Alex Hunt and Cedric van Putten. What I really want to kind of set this up is we have the history of the React Native debugging experience throughout the years, and then we have the path forward, and we're at this inflection point between the two. And so this is a really good like touch point to be able to talk about this stuff. And I want to start with you, Cedric, because you've been talking about this for a while, about why don't we just all use console.log?
Well, fun fact, there are still discussion over this, right? But if you use console.log, you will soon still have to use the DevTools, as logging looks like it's going to get removed from terminal. There are opinions on that one. Maybe it's a bit rough to start with that one. But in my opinion, like adding console logging is fine. It's fine, but it does add like a lot of time to debug something, or like you can't really look into things without updating the code, which means you have to go into the code, edit it, refresh, maybe go through the whole thing, instead of just adding a few breakpoints and then like inspecting all the information that is available right there. It's like if you just do a console.log, right? You can log a value, sure, but what if you need to check what like this specific function returns, right? Like it is so fundamentally better, in my opinion, that if you have access to functions or like the global scope or anything that you can do within the app itself, you can just like code it. Like when I debug anything, I go into the native modules manually and then invoke things manually to see exactly what's going on and where. So it's a little bit more than just logging some text or logging some value. It's also invoking things and maybe work around some user interactions.
Yeah, it's all about like getting insight into what's actually happening and checking your assumptions. Like usually when I'm beating my head against the wall on some sort of a bug, it's because I'm making an assumption about what's happening that is just incorrect.
Yeah, exactly. And those assumptions, like one time I had to debug something that was so out of reach for all of us. Like it was happening on EAS, but only for specific projects using specific setups. And there were like 5 other factors. Being able to see the whole context and gather like as much as information together to piece it, or to gather enough information together to create this image of what you think might happening, or like put the puzzle or pieces together. That is so fundamentally useful. Like I cannot have that not anymore. I need it for a lot of things.
Yeah, totally. And I want to ask you, Alex, as well, because obviously debugging tools matter. What's your take on that? Like, why don't you just use console.log?
Yeah, again, console.log is useful. You'd think it'd be an easy question to answer. I guess console.log only gives you a view on some of the system for what you've explicitly looked to show. We really want to provide tooling to let you understand the state of your app as it runs and see it in different ways, whether that's React DevTools, sources panel, breakpoints. And these are fundamentally more powerful tools for things you might not predict up front happening. They're just fundamentally more powerful tooling.
I think like as our applications get more complex, like when you start out with Hello World, you're just starting getting like you're in university or you're learning to code. The types of problems that you run into tend to be honestly totally fine to use a console.log. There's not a lot going on, so you can check these things as they go. And so a lot of times people get used to that workflow, and then it just kind of like continues to build as time goes on. Where like the applications we work on, the frameworks we work on, they get more and more complex as time goes on. And I don't know, like React Native itself is probably the most complex like framework that I've ever worked on, just because out of necessity, because it's hitting so many different technologies and so many different platforms that it's trying to target. And you need tools that are sufficiently like powerful to deal with that. So I want to talk about what debugging looked like in the past. A lot of people listening to this will be maybe people who've been around from the beginning and know what it was like to deal with the debugging tools in the past. And some people will be relatively new to React Native and just coming in now and wondering what the state of it is. And I want to ask you, Alex, on that. Like, what did debugging look like in the past?
Yeah, well, we came into this problem at the start of 2023, and really it was all this fragmentation. A lot of historic fragmentation around what React Native started out being and how it evolved and what it is now. Really, for the topic of JS debugging, like step-through debugging, we always basically pointed to whichever engine was inside React Native at that point in time, whether it was JavaScript core or JSC on Android and Hermes, and said, okay, this is the debugger server. Now let's just see how the JavaScript's executing, connect to that, expose it somehow, that will work. And we did that. We added more. We added fancier front ends to connect to it. And then with Flipper, like, okay, let's add this adjacent plugin system that separately communicates and maybe does let you debug native stuff in a convenient way. We were just adding more and more onto the layers of the onion that is React Native. And what we realized during 2023 was we really couldn't continue adding stuff, even though we were excited to maybe build some new capabilities in. Fundamentally, having debugging being hosted by the JS engine wasn't the right model. And there'd been a ton of bugs and fundamental issues because of it. And a lot that we couldn't build into the back end. That's what powers the debug experience to create something unified, unless we really stripped it out and re-architected it, which is what we took on for React Native DevTools. Yeah,
that's a big job, but it's also, debugging is so important. This is something I tell newer developers, who talk to me, like they're like, what skills should I be learning and things, what frameworks should I use, and etc. You can learn a lot of different frameworks. I've learned many over the years. I'll learn more in the future, but really you need those like fundamental skills, like especially things like debugging, because I don't know if there are more frustrating moments in programming than debugging sometimes. Like if you ask anybody what's your most frustrating experience, it's usually something like either setting up tooling and it doesn't work. So again, You have to debug that. Or your app itself or what you're trying to program is also not working and you don't know why. And it's like you're hitting your head against the wall for like 4 hours. And I ran a company for 10 years. Now I've run this one for 9. My previous company, I had a lot of more junior developers like that I was teaching and stuff. Many of them are now like seniors at my current company, but they would be like, I can't fix this thing. And I'd be like, what are you doing to debug it? And they're like, well, I'm just trying stuff. I'm just trying new things to see what happens. And I'm like, no, let's take the time to set up some sort of insight into what's happening, whether it's just putting in some logs or actually like connecting up a debugger, jumping into some sort of a REPL. There's a lot of different ways to do this, or even just like sometimes I'll like build a view into the app itself just to show some data, show something that's happening. And usually like after we set that up, it becomes clear what's going on. So yeah, it's been extremely important. And you're right. We had like the Chrome like remote debugger. We had Flipper. We had a bunch of different tools. We built Reactatron back in the day and continue to maintain that. Going forward, reliability is a big deal for React Native, like making sure your apps aren't glitchy and crashing and that sort of thing. This goes back to like a lot of the like reputation that React Native has within the community. It's like, oh, can you tell it's a React Native app, right? So I know that was super important to make sure that the apps are reliable, but then we couldn't do that because the tools we had weren't even reliable. So I don't know what question I had there. I was just ranting a bit, but Alex, I'm sure you identify with some of that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, what a lot of you're saying is let's align with the new architecture, really. That's rebuilding React Native from the inside out to be more reliable, to be better architected, to make more sense, to match what has become of the current scope of what it does and that we've figured out with the programming model at production-ready React Native. And yeah, we took a super similar stance of React Native DevTools. Like the rebuild was pretty much motivated by reliability and just fundamental correctness as well. If we're going to have Chrome DevTools be a front end for debugging the app, we need to model it the same way in the back end as Chrome does to really deliver on things, to deliver on breakpoints across reloads, to deliver on a reliable connection, to deliver on lay down the line extendability. So yeah, that's totally the philosophy behind it.
Yeah, and I do want to talk about CDP, the Chrome DevTools Protocol, more. I want to ask Cedric, because I think didn't you mention CDP to me like a long time ago?
Yeah, the idea of actually using CDP to debug React Native came like at least within Expo like years ago. Like I think just after launch of Flipper, because before that we were actually using my favorite or not so favorite debugging workflow, which is the remote debugger. That was fundamentally a bad idea, but you can always say that in hindsight, I guess. But that was basically like the start of actually using CDP for React Native itself, right? And there were a lot of good points there, but like moving the whole engine to a different machine and then like let React Native interrupt or bridge the whole network layer, that's not a good idea. So we wanted to give it another shot like a while ago, but then we never got around to it. That is like until before app.js in I think 2023.
Yeah, last year. Yeah.
Yeah. So right before that, I think Kudo came with the idea of doing something different. Then we did some research and turns out that Hermes was actually supporting parts of the CDP spec. But as Alex mentioned, like it was built as a house of cards, right? Where things were added, but without a solid fundamental system. So things were a bit buggy. So we tried to work around a few of those like really, really rough edge cases. We got somewhat far, by no means a full coverage of everything. Yeah. But at least for us it was way better than like having nothing or having something else. Let's not name it by name. Yeah. So there's a whole history there.
So Chrome DevTools Protocol, CDP, we're going to be mentioning that a lot. It is essentially like a common protocol for implementing DevTools within a browser, usually for JavaScript inspection in particular. And I believe many browsers implement this. It's not just Chrome, right? That CDP is used in multiple places wherever there's kind of JavaScript.
There are a couple. Not all browsers do the same, Like some have their own variation on it, but look somewhat similar. I think Opera is one of them that has like the variation on it.
The Safari?
Chrome and Blink forked from WebKit, right? So the one in Safari is a precursor to CDP in a way.
Okay.
And Cedric's right in that all of the protocols, debugging in every browser looks pretty similar, especially for the browsers based on Chromium now. Yeah, it's all kind of historically inspired from the same thing. And CDP is like this versatile communication mechanism to ask a browser, like, how are you running? What can I get from the page? What task can I ask you to do? Like, start a performance profile. Even, like, C's quite cool. I want to build on it because it's mature. And it really is a standard that's evolved and can cover a lot of things. But it could even do things like, we could ask the browser to control itself, stuff like Puppeteer does. And you can do that over CDP as well, like click around elements and interact. And there's an exciting slide for my talk at React Native, which is with CDP, everything in scope for browser DevTools could be in scope for React Native in the far future. And stuff like that down the line could be really exciting.
And it keeps feeding into this idea that React Native is, in some ways, kind of a browser. It's not really a browser, but it's kind of a browser. Like there's a reason why we're not using a browser. There's a reason why React Native exists instead of just putting it into a web view. React Native has many more sharp edges, but also it's just so much more powerful in a lot of ways, and it uses the built-in UI kits and whatnot. For one thing, a fairly significant portion of the people coming to React Native are web developers, and they're used to a Chrome inspector kind of experience. Let's shift gears into the debugger itself, the new one. And let's talk about how that came to be and then how that was predicated on this web experience. Alex, I'll put you on the spot on that one.
Sure thing. As like Cedric was saying, like around a similar time, CDP had been used almost accidentally as the latent protocol because we were using JavaScript as our language, and it's like an engine-aligned concept. And yeah, it also became clear to us that continuing to use it made sense. Chrome DevTools, it is such a mature, rich, familiar experience for web developers that has so many things out of the box, really. And if you think of a React Native app at like the surface application level, it does line up almost exactly like a browser. I don't think we really coined it in that way when we started looking at this, but the familiarity point was really strong. So, like CDP interoperates with IDEs as well. Like DevTools frontend is not the only frontend. We could interface with like editors like VS Code, which translates it over DApp, and that works out of the box. That is how node debugging works out of the box with VS Code. So we get all of that for free if we double down on CDP. Just we had this version of a CDP server that was incredibly bare bones. Not only did it only support like a few domains and maybe step-through debugging and logs, inside those feature sets it supported barely any of the coverage of available like rich methods that were there, and that in some cases that if you clicked around the front end, it would make those requests and React Native wouldn't handle it. So you might have buggy or missing functionality. So the starting point, even in 2023, was asking Hermes directly to say, hey, could you patch some of these gaps? And it made advances, and we got features like persisted console logs. It was the starting point. In 2023, we tried to add a lot of stuff and get like quick wins. And it was later that year that we really decided we needed to down tools and go into rebuild mode. It just made sense. And the result is what we have now. I think we actually did that in a remarkable amount of time and actually shipped the thing too. It's like a mini new architecture, but for the debugger.
That's amazing.
It's been super fun, and the whole team's learned loads doing it. We built it around Hermes as the first party supported thing, and there are new interfaces. So right now, React Native DevTools is built around and re-interfacing with Hermes and only supports Hermes.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. You only have so much engineering time. You can't solve every problem. And you have more say in the Hermes side of things versus JSC, which is, there's just more interested parties there.
To be fair, like if you have your app running in JSC, just like, for example, like a web view, right? With Safari, you can actually just inspect that. That's baked in. Like there's a tool for that already. It falls apart when you're actually using Hermes, like the default React Native engine. So the focus on Hermes here was extremely important. And then like the JSC support, that's there already, but you have to turn it on in like non-obvious ways.
It works pretty magically and quite stably from the start, as you said. JSC debugging is the only mode that we've left undeprecated, apart from React Native DevTools. So it still stays around.
So, okay, this might be a dumb question, but why not just make Hermes compatible with that?
I guess because Safari DevTools is, with the way the web has evolved, more primitive and less extendable.
Yeah.
And it is not the protocol used for things like VS Code. So yeah, it's Chrome really has become the web over the last at least decade and a half.
Yeah.
So that's
Makes
been
sense.
the protocol to use.
Yeah, totally. Cedric, really quick, I want to ask, you'd been working on like an Expo debugger. What sort of led to you combining efforts with Meta?
The start of our combined effort was actually AppJazz 2023. Alex did a talk there, and I did a talk. And then in the preparation phase, we like shared our talk titles and a little bit of an abstract. And then turns out that Alex and my talk were actually pretty similar. So we're like, wait, what? And then we started chatting.
Yeah.
And after that, it is so fundamentally, it is important at Expo for our users to have a way to debug. And with Flipper was a way, maybe not the preferred way, but with Hermes, we felt that there was a need for something way better.
Well, yeah, exactly. And sure, Expo completely beat us to integrating in one click of debugger launch flow by at least 6 months or maybe a year. So for us, that was a huge validator that works and people were willing to use that outside of Flipper even back then. And yeah, what we imagined the debugger becoming was really aligned.
I think it's awesome that you did combine efforts. It's not always easy to do because you have to sort of commit to a level of collaboration. You don't have quite as much just like, oh, I'm going to do this thing and you go do it, right? You have to talk to each other a little bit. But there are benefits too, because more people aligned and pulling the same way and not reinventing the same thing over and over.
To be fair, the CDP sounds like a very complicated system, right? But in essence, it is similar to how Reactotron works.
Right.
You have a WebSocket and you have structured data going over it. And then the CDP is feature rich.
Yeah, no, totally. We invented our own protocol for Reactotron. Of course, it's a much more limited subset. Flipper, I want to talk about Flipper real quick. So Flipper was removed from the core experience of React Native. Flipper did bring a lot of good tools. I wrote an article about how to replace Flipper within your stack. What I ended up recommending was go use the Xcode tools and use a lot of the Android Studio tools. And you're still going to need to do that because the React Native debugger isn't necessarily going to give you insight into all of the native stuff. You're still going to need some way to handle that. And I think when people think about a React Native app, they think about an app, like one app. But it's really multiple. It's whatever platform you're deploying to. And yes, the debugger and Reactotron, anything on the JavaScript side of things is going to be focused on the part of the app that kind of works on more or less all of the platforms. But then you also have all the native code. And whether you wrote it or not, it's still there. It's still running. How you envision the debugging experience, do you see it more like people having Xcode open, people having Android Studio open and learning those tools? Would your advice to developers be make sure you understand those tools a lot?
Yeah, it depends the nature of the application you're building. Say you're using Expo and you're using many of the well-produced Expo modules and working in that space in your product code, we'd hope that debugging at the React Native level of abstraction is entirely all you need to do. Kind of network requests and data manipulation and view rendering is all there. But if you are starting to write things that are more complex, adding native modules, and actually writing pieces of the platform layer yourself, at those points, Xcode, Instruments, and Android Studio are absolutely the tools to use. Back on Flipper, I think with React Native DevTools, we are what we need to do, and we do start with a small feature set, but it's the discipline to offer more in this tool than was previously offered with just Chrome DevTools frontend, but not as much as Flipper, and not where it leaks outside the kind of application browser model, because we will never build tools that are as good as those specialized expert tools for each native platform. And at the end of the day, React Native is native. And if you are building out those layers or discover a bug at those layers, the best tooling has been produced by those two major companies.
I fully agree on that one. It's you will always lag behind if you use something or create something that mimics the first party tool from the company who made it themselves. It doesn't make a lot of sense to waste a lot of engineering effort onto that while you can actually use whatever the first party has to offer. Like, that being said, it isn't always possible to use those first-party tooling, right? Like Android Studio should be able to run it on most machines, but if you have an old one, it might be hard to use. And bring me to my next point, Xcode doesn't work on Windows, right? But at Expo, we do have a lot of Windows users. So we try to make it like optional, where if you want, you can go all the way into it. Or if you have the ability to, like if you have a MacBook or a Mac and you can run Xcode, you should be able to just dive into the whole, like all the way down to the instruction code almost. That being said, like if you have native errors or like if something is not compiling right, then it's likely that you have to go for Xcode or Android Studio. And then if you have a JavaScript side errors, like those are super easy to debug with the React Native DevTools. But if the native layer has issues, you can't get to the Chrome or to the React Native DevTools. If the native layer has issues, it actually might not work properly because of those native layer issues.
I love how practical that take is, because like if you talk about this stuff on Twitter or something, you'll get people who are like basically like everybody should do things the most like maximum. You should always be using all of the full everything tools at the right operating system, everything. And it's just not the reality, especially in emerging markets and whatnot. Like, and why not build tools that are accessible?
Yeah, exactly. That's how Expo today basically works, right? Where we offer services to build your iOS app, even if you have Windows. We have Expo Go, where you don't have to build anything on a native layer. You can just use the JavaScript part. So that's the idea of Expo itself.
So what are your favorite features of the new debugger? I'm going to start, and I'm just going to say breakpoints. Let's start there. Breakpoints kind of worked if you knew what you were doing, but like now is just like built in, and some people listening won't even know what a breakpoint is. Like some people will never have used a breakpoint, but in VS Code you can like click on the side like the gutter and a little red dot pops up, and then when the app actually gets to that line of code, it will pause and be like, hey, you're here. And now you can inspect the state of what variables do I have and whatnot. Alex, what's your favorite feature of the new debugger?
I'm going to ditto that. Just as a message to everyone, please use breakpoints or try them out. Like, Imagine if you could get the stack trace to that error before it happens. If you suspect anything's going to happen upon your code, add a breakpoint there, and you've got all the context. Like it stops, your code was hit. You've got a panel with all the variables in scope, the stack that's led up to that, and you can like play around live at that point. And you can even do like conditional breakpoints. You get into a context where you can see like the whole surrounding application, whereas otherwise you might have made 10 speculative console logs in the dark.
I was going to
totally
say conditional as well.
Conditional, because like one of my problems with breakpoints when I've used them on other IDEs and contexts in the past is it's like the first pass through when it hits the breakpoint, or maybe even the first 100 are not the one I need. It's when it gets to this certain state, now I need it to stop. And having the conditional breakpoint of like, when we're in this state, now I want to break and figure out why it's wrong. Yeah, totally makes sense. Cedric, is that your favorite part of this, or do you have something else?
I was gonna go for breakpoints as well, but then to be original conditional breakpoints. But now that is already mentioned as well.
See, this is why I went first.
Let's go for something totally different. Like I'm gonna say the network inspector.
Oh, yeah.
And like the whole reason why I really like it is it was actually possible before back in the days, before the React Native DevTools. But you had to set up like this whole proxy. Basically, you had to modify your whole system in order to check what kind of requests your app is making. And like that's very common, right? Most apps nowadays actually use internet. Like not all, but most like log in somewhere or fetch some data from something. Having that like available and visible to you with just like J and then clicking on the network tab is insane to me.
I'm contractually obligated to say that Reactitron has had this for 7 years. I wish I had fixed this a long time ago, but we didn't have a tab for it. It would just show up in our main timeline. You'd have all your network requests. If we just like added like network, it would have been amazing. But the fact that the debugger is going to be coming with it is huge. I agree. Like network requests, that's one of the main reasons I'm jumping into the debuggers, to look at like what's being requested and why am I not getting, or what kind of data am I getting back?
Right.
Yeah.
Like the Expo network inspector is actually a little bit deeper than that. Like we actually go into the native layer instead of like.
Oh, you capture native ones as well.
Yes. So
okay.
If a native request is being sent, we should be able to detect it as well. On Android, it's a little bit harder because there's no primitive for that, but on iOS you actually have, and that gives like a lot more insight in how React Native module might be working. There are plenty opportunities for improvements, like a lot actually. For example, how would a cached image that is normally like loaded remotely, how would that show up in a network inspector as cached? It's like there's no network request.
That's true. Yeah, I feel like web developers who come to React Native, as opposed to like native developers, have a certain expectation of developer experience that's pretty high because we have all these cool tools. Like the ability to see, hey, this was just a cache hit and we didn't make a request. That's just built in. You just expect it to work. I've been doing web for, I don't even want to say, let's see. It's like almost 20 years. It is 20 years almost. Yeah, about that. And like I guess I didn't have inspectors back in the early days, but like Firefox, I think brought in something early. Anyway, okay, I don't want to talk about the old days too much, but we've had it forever. And a lot of this stuff, native developers just deal with it. I want to ask, Alex, this is specifically for you. Have you gotten feedback from developers who have used the new debugger, and what's been the flavor of the feedback so far?
The flavor of the feedback with internal and external feedback. The internal side, it really is the story that there is one clear entry point to debugging and that it works. It works in every scenario we have internally and it works reliably. I think native engineers in particular don't so much come with the web developer expectations, which I have, that like you've got these rich high level features, but more that like, is our breakpoints going to work in this application? Can I debug the program, that core functionality? And having that work in a clear one-click entry point has been such an upgrade for our users that we have good feedback on that. We are going to collect more data with the State of React Native survey coming up, hopefully. Yeah. And really, I want to get some like forward-looking information there.
Yeah.
We'll have free-form questions for anyone listening in that survey to just please throw your input in about what you want, dislike, would like to come. But yeah, like in open source, what we've seen so far is chatter or lots of feature requests too and constructive feedback. It's like it's all mixed, and internally as well. Like internally, like people there would love to see performance tooling get a lot better. At open source, like network panel is by far at the top of the list.
I just have a curiosity question. Why are you even supporting the old architecture? Like I would have thought that this would be like a forward-looking new architecture thing only.
I mean, at the point we began this, and even at this point in time, imagine that we have lots of consuming apps that are meta, and not all of them are on the new architecture yet. So our scope, selfishly from our corner of the team, was we want to get off this fragmented tooling to something that's reliable and that levels up the development experience with React Native for everyone at Meta and everyone. And it happens to be in a chunk of the code base where it's reasonable to do it for both architectures. So like for a bit more engineering time, we got that working and we're able to also like run our experiments internally against the maximum amount of users.
Do you have any tips for developers who are trying out the new tools, like, key features that they should try first, other than breakpoints, which we've talked about?
The React DevTools panels are really great. So Components Inspector and the React Profiler. Big takeaway is that it works just like it does on web now in React Native. Every feature of these panels, from basic stuff like selecting and highlighting UI elements and changing props live, almost like you can in the Elements Inspector, to the Profiler, which really is the closest thing we have to why did you render answers, or what is taking time, what is re-rendering. If you care about the performance of your React app, that's the best place to look right now.
As someone who's working on the DevTools, do you get a chance to use them yourselves, like on actual apps? And do you ever go, wow, this sucks in this one way, I'm going to go fix it? Or also like, wow, that was even more useful than I thought. That's pretty cool.
Well, for me, yes. Like when we were working on the first version, like at Expo, even before React Native DevTools, like I used the debugger to debug the debugger a lot. Like I joked about that as well. Yeah. Then I used the VS Code debugger to use no debugger to debug the CDP integration of the debugger. I use the debugger to debug the debugger a lot, basically. Yeah. And then, of course, every day I'm using it right now. Like, we have a lot of tests, a lot of dogfooding, and a lot of examples where things might just not work when you test canary versions. And one of them was actually the React Confab yesterday. So Kadi and I were jumping on a call and just clicking through. We spotted the issues. There were some upgrading issues, some Yarn v1 related issues. But yeah, basically, without the React Native DevTools, it would have taken me like 3 days or something instead of just 2 hours on a call.
That's amazing. How about you, Alex?
That's awesome.
Oh, I wish I had a good React Native side project right now. I don't really. The closest I've got to using DevTools is I found some great bugs in Chrome DevTools front end by running DevTools on that DevTools. Apart from that, gosh, using the VS Code or like Android Studio debuggers on actual native code this year, it's been essential, but it's not tools we're building. Yeah, just like Cedric was saying.
It's tough because like this is like your main job. Like you're working on the debugger, and using the debugger, you could get lots of insight into it, but you're more relying on people to give you feedback and tell you their experience and whatnot, which totally reasonable. But I think we need both types. I think we need people who are really like deep in the internals, like what you're doing, Alex, and your team. And then we need people who are using it every day and also being willing to communicate that in a way that is constructive. Of course, people are working on this and they're probably aware of the issue. Well, I'm really excited about it. I thank you both and everybody on your teams for the work and the investment that you're putting into this, because I think this really does make my life easier. It makes my developers' lives easier, my clients' lives easier. It makes for I think it'll make for tangibly better React Native apps as well. Like the ones that actually hit the App Store are going to be better because of this. Before we end here, where are we going with this? Like, what's next for the debugger?
With this rewrite that we've done quietly and within our team, we kind of rebuilt everything and built the basic features back out again, really like breakpoints. We didn't build more advanced features or highly requested features. So we're like immediately going to build upon this new platform base and give users like very useful other core tooling from web, starting with the network panel. So we're absolutely investing in that. Internally, we have a focus on performance tooling. So we're going to explore how we can set up like an official profiling build flavor of React Native and deliver features of Chrome's performance panel, or a subset of it with like browser-like stats for React Native. And maybe after that, explore other performance tooling that maybe aren't expert tools. Like what could we ambiently detect and automatically flag to users, at least. Maybe that's a research area for this year. And like another big thing we want to hit is see if we can bring first-party VS Code into a better place. VS Code, as mentioned, supports CDP, but it targets the node backend and also behaves a little differently than Chrome's frontend does when interacting with us, particularly around kind of source maps and where files come from. The files are in the editor, you'd think, but it's resolving that whole tree of things. So we want to make VS Code support great. And there's no timelines in any of these things, but we're at least definitely working on those pieces, which hopefully emit things we ship to open source over time. But the network panel is definitely top priority for what reaches open source.
All of that sounds amazing. Obviously, that's going to be a lot of work. Cedric, where are you at with this?
Yeah, so I fully agree. We, or like mostly Meta, reworked the whole fundamentals, but now it's time to step out of it, I think, or like not too fast because it still needs to be built right, but step out of the absolute core basics and into the more feature set that Flipper had or any other debugging tool. For me, my stretch goal is still to like remove the biggest pain point, or like one of the biggest pain point of React Native from the state of React Native survey. Mm-hmm. Like I want debugging gone there. Wouldn't it be great if we had the actual element inspector as well, like those kind of things? But for that, we do need to have fundamentals available to us to be able to implement it, and that's the first next step, I would say. And then we'll see where we can get it. I'm
going to make an executive decision here and extend this even more, because I have this question that I think is important. What do you see as being the role of other debugging tools such as Reactitron, React Native IDE, and others that exist out there and that probably won't be going away? And combine that also with, do you intend to add like a plugin architecture?
Sure. Well, other tools, beginning with like React Native IDE or Radon as it's now named, or VS Code Expo. These are like extended versions of VS Code's debugger, and they are front ends for which they benefit from the new React Native DevTools server. So they fit in completely. We'll continue to build a stronger and stronger backend, and they should work perfectly. Tools like Reactron, if they want to offer like additional other tooling that's not in the CDP surface, can totally do that and totally be a separate entry point that's opened for that purpose. Some purpose in between the low-level native debugging and what React Native DevTools currently offers. But yeah, then on this kind of aligned with web extensions area, this has also been a highly requested feature. Like other previous debugger projects have offered the ability to have like useful Chrome extensions as dev plugins built in. There's React Native Debugger with Apollo and Redux DevTools. And Relay DevTools for us. Like there's absolutely a use case for supporting Chrome extensions. And Expo's got really good prior art in that they've got the Expo Dev Plugins set of packages where you can bootstrap and run these separately. And that really validates the user demand and use case for us as well. So yeah, we said we are beginning to look at extensions in a reasonable priority with Expo as a key partner there. And I'd say like early next year, it's mostly going to be from the research side, deciding if we can offer like a good, very well scoped API where the scope is, if the extension communicates like with the main JavaScript context, it's valid. If you have an extension that's some front end that is trying to get outside of CDP, that would be like the counterexample, very much something we wouldn't want, and something that would, that's what Flipper was doing. That's high level, yeah, we'd like to look at extensions, need to design them very carefully. It'll sit somewhere for us to interface with Expo with during next year.
Yeah, I agree, because like once you have a plugin ecosystem, it starts making things harder to change, because now you have a bunch of plugins you're probably going to break if you like make any changes that sometimes are very, very needed. So I would absolutely support this like cautious and very deliberate approach. That totally makes sense to me.
There are always specialized tooling, different kind of tooling, like Reactotron, that has a more ergonomic way of like debugging or like creating a feature set to debug with. Like basically you can create your own group of features purely for debugging for specific teams, right? That's like a more specific tool to debug with, and VS Code is the same. Like VS Code is literally next to your code, like you literally edit with it, but it does not have a network inspector. So there are always room for other dev tooling. This is just a general purpose tool.
Yep. Thanks so much, both of you. I know there's way more we could talk about. Seriously, like we keep going another hour, but I really appreciate both of you coming on, talking about all this stuff. Where can people find you online to follow progress on this, Alex?
Well, yeah, for progress on this, so follow me. I'm on X as Alex Hunt without the vowels, so ALXHNT. And the release of React Native DevTools actually comes with a discussions post. So if you search for 076 React Native DevTools discussion, you're likely to reach that. If you go to the docs or the blog for React Native 76, you'll see the announcement and the kind of coverage of base features that come with React Native DevTools.
Awesome. Cedric, how about you?
You can follow me on Twitter, Cedric_dev, but also on the other blue sky-ish app. It's Cedric.dev. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Of course, you can follow me at Jamon Holmgren or on Blue Sky, Jamon.dev. And you also can follow the podcast, React Native RDIO, on Twitter. A special thanks to our editors, because they're going to be spending a lot more time on this one. And as always, see you all next time.
As always, thanks to our editor, Todd Worth, our assistant editor, Jed Bartosky, our marketing and episode release coordinator, Justin Husky, and our guest coordinator, Mazen Chami. Our producers and hosts are Jamon Holmgren, Robin Hines, and Mazen Chami. Thanks to our sponsor, Infinite Red. Check us out at infinite.red/radio. A special thanks to all of you listening today. Make sure to subscribe to React Native Radio on all the major podcasting platforms.